go, here we go, now.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, something's got to give. 2, something's got to give. 3, something's got to give. Let the party start.
Around 4 months ago, I took a look at the WrestleMania games that were released for the Nintendo Gamecube. While WrestleMania 18 left a lot to be desired and WrestleMania 19 fixed many of the problems that plagued the previous game, WWE fans who only owned a Nintendo Gamecube were still looking at the Smackdown series on the PS2 with envy. It's not that the WrestleMania games were completely awful, but the Smackdown games had proven to be much more fleshed out. There was more to do, there were more customizable options. Smackdown on the PS2 was the leader when it came to the WWE's video game offerings at the time. 2003 saw the release of the critically acclaimed Smackdown Here Comes the Pain, and simply put, it was the wrestling game of the 6th generation of consoles. Enter WWE Day of Reckoning, released in 2004 for the GameCube as Ukes tried to follow up Here Comes the Pain with SmackDown vs Raw on PS2. Fans may have been a little apprehensive about Day of Reckoning when it was announced. The WrestleMania GameCube games weren't everyone's cup of tea, and of course, Here Comes the Pain had made a huge splash on the PS2. So many may have considered Day of Reckoning pretty much dead on arrival. THQ's marketing team promised a more comprehensive WWE game for the Nintendo Gamecube. It seemed like even the game publishers knew that the reception of WrestleMania 18 and 19 wasn't all that great, so fans remained hopeful until the end of summer in 2004. While Day of Reckoning does hold over a lot from WrestleMania 19, the game was seriously tightened up, resulting in a really fun experience that pleased many of those GameCube owners who didn't have a PlayStation 2. Not only that, but Day of Reckoning became a WWE game that stood out in its own right. The first SmackDown vs Raw, released in 2004, wasn't all that hot, while Day of Reckoning was getting good reviews from video game publications. IGN scored Day of Reckoning 8.3 out of 10, GameSpot gave it an 8.2, and GamePro magazine gave Day of Reckoning 4.5 stars out of 5. So well received was Day of Reckoning that a sequel was released that I feel was even better than the first. But this video is only going to focus on Day of Reckoning 1, and the sequel will get covered in a future upload. Let's take a look through the menus first then. You'll see that in terms of match types, there aren't really any new additions here in comparison to WrestleMania 19. The presentation is miles better though, everything looks a lot cleaner. I'll skim through the roster here so you can see who made the cut, and it's quite a good selection available here. Day of Reckoning and its sequel are very much Ruthless Aggression games, so the selection we get here is quite decent. Notable names on the Raw side include The Rock, Shawn Michaels, Edge, Chris Jericho, Randy Orton and Ric Flair. SmackDown superstars include Eddie Guerrero, The Bashams, Booker T, the Doctor of Thugonomics John Cena and The Undertaker. I haven't unlocked any superstars here because just like when I looked at the WrestleMania games, I don't have my old memory card anymore from all those years ago, so this is a fresh game I'm starting here. But unlockable legends include Bret Hart, Brutus Beefcake, Greg Valentine and Andre the Giant. Beefcake and Valentine are odd choices for sure, but still at least it's something different. We also have divas available including Trish Stratus and Stacy Keibler. With everything unlocked we have 40 superstars here, so not bad at all. There's a choice of arenas too based on 2003 and early 2004 pay-per-views, but again this is a new save file. Arenas are unlocked via the shop zone section of the game along with new create a wrestler parts, moves and weapons. You can earn money for the shop by playing exhibition matches or playing through the career mode. Here's some footage of the gameplay then, and you can see that in terms of graphics, it's a big upgrade from WrestleMania 19. I think the WWE games on Gamecube are a great way to look at how some third-party developers got better with experience. When you compare WrestleMania 18 to Day of Reckoning 2, you would swear the games were running on different hardware. Anyway, the button layout here for Day of Reckoning 1 is pretty much the same as WrestleMania 19. It kinda keeps the feeling of the old Nintendo 64 wrestling games by utilizing long button presses to perform stronger grapples and strikes. Reversing is the same, using the trigger buttons to counter your opponent's attacks, and yes, you still have to put up with the insane trigger button travel, but it is quite satisfying when you reverse a move. Speaking of your moves, your arsenal has been deeply upgraded here. There's an insane amount of new moves added to the game, which was admittedly very much needed with this release. Many moves were shared among wrestlers in Mania 19, but there's tons of variation here in Day of Reckoning. Guys have their own unique versions of the same moves. Guys have movesets that match their real life skill sets. So Day of Reckoning is a great improvement in this area. The same holds true for special moves. Finishers are performed again by pressing the A and B buttons together. This fires up your special meter that gives you a limited amount of time to perform as many finishers as you possibly can. And the variety of special moves and the situations where you can pull off your special has been expanded greatly. I do like the use of the timed special meter though. It forces you to think fast in order to hit your finishing move, and it can bring a little anxiety when your opponent triggers their meter too. There's also momentum shifts and momentum lifts. A momentum shift lets you swap your momentum meter once per match and is only available when you're in dire straits, and the momentum lift lets you slam superstars who are much heavier than you by playing a button mashing minigame. The collision detection in Day of Reckoning has also been changed about, and some people liked the new changes while others didn't. Typically, when playing multi-man matches in the old Smackdown games, there was no way to interrupt a move once the animation had started. So, for example, if you're in a tag match and a CPU-controlled rock goes for a rock bottom on your tag partner, there was no way to break the hold until the move was completed. Day of Reckoning completely changes that. Every move can be broke up mid-animation. This has its strengths and weaknesses though. It's great that you can stop a finisher in this manner, but the new collision system also means that you can get knocked down while guys are performing moves on each other, making four-way matches totally chaotic at times. Also, the ref is going to take a ton of bumps because he gets in the way of your moves. I don't mind all of this though. Matches can end up being much longer due to finishers getting broken up constantly, and it forces you to check your surroundings before hitting a finisher on your opponent. I remember the old message boards back in the day saying that these changes made Smackdown feel more like an arcade game in comparison to Day of Reckoning. Not sure I agree with that, but I could see where people were coming from. I should also quickly mention that there's no commentary in the game. You instead get a few licensed songs that were also found in Smackdown vs. Raw, such as Breaking Benjamin's Firefly and Zebrahead's Alone. As mentioned earlier, match types are pretty much the same as WrestleMania 19 and all handled pretty much the same way too. Things like the ladder match have been touched up slightly to make the experience a little smoother, and really, there's still enough here to keep fans happy. There's only 4 guys in the ring at any given time due to memory limitations of the Gamecube, but these things are also expected for older games like this. My favourite matches to play are ladder and cell matches. Right, let's look at Create a Superstar. This was also greatly updated from previous games, and it was one of the best features of Day of Reckoning at the time. Now, I'm fucking awful at creating superstars. I used to copy formulas that were posted online, and I even tried to use a formula here to give me this dreadful version of Reptile. Apologies to the guy who made this formula. But the amount of options here has been greatly expanded upon, and again, it was something that GameCube owners didn't really have before before Day of Reckoning. Keep in mind too that this is a game from 2004. Unlike me, people had to get a little creative to make superstars and characters with limited resources. Some of the custom superstars I see today in modern wrestling games completely blow my mind, and they really do make these older games look like complete shit. But put yourself back in that time frame. I wish I could show some more creations here, but the Angel Fire and Neo Seeker forums that hosted old pictures are completely dead nowadays. But trust me, this was an upgrade, even if Reptile here does have a massive forehead and the complete wrong gear. I'll go through a few menus here so you can have a look at Create a Wrestler. Maybe the biggest addition to Day of Reckoning though was a complete and proper career mode. WrestleMania 18 had a very simple one-player experience where you would wrestle one guy after another. WrestleMania 19 spiced things up with the revenge mode where, strangely, you would do battle away from a wrestling ring in order to ruin the WrestleMania 19 pay-per-view. But Day of Reckoning finally let GameCube fans enjoy a WWE story that had all the twists and turns that were normally reserved for the Smackdown games on PS2. The Day of Reckoning story mode centers around your created wrestler. Let's use janky Reptile here. And the story is all about your journey towards either the World Heavyweight Championship or the WWE Championship. You'll start at the very bottom at the house shows as part of the WWE's developmental program, wrestling jobbers and guys who toe the wellness policy line. Then eventually you'll go to Sunday Night Heat and then either Raw or Smackdown. Depending on which brand you choose, you'll either become part of Triple H's Evolution stable or The Undertaker's new ministry, and the final match of the story mode will be an Iron Man match against either Hunter or Taker, depending on which show you picked. If you plan on playing Day of Reckoning 2, I'd recommend selecting the Raw brand, as the sequel story carries on right where you left off here in Day of Reckoning 1. A welcome addition to this story mode is the win conditions. There'll be certain tasks you need to complete within a match in order to continue the story. Again, nothing new these days, but at the time it was something new. There's no voice acting at all here in story mode, by the way. Everything is text based, and really it's not that big of a deal. Some of the voice acting in WWE games back then were painful to listen to anyway. You'll also earn experience points after each match, and you'll use these in the locker room to increase janky Reptile's stats. As career mode progresses, your opponents will become more difficult, so spending points is an absolute must, unless you enjoy the challenge, of course. Where Day of Reckoning really shines for me is in the ring. I find the gameplay to be extremely enjoyable, and as mentioned earlier, I do enjoy setting up multi-man bouts and settling in for long matchups. Fans who came from WrestleMania 18 and 19 would have seen Day of Reckoning as a massive upgrade, and while the jump in graphics is noticeable enough, it's the upgrades that's going on under the surface that helps make things as enjoyable as they are. The thing is though, is that Day of Reckoning 1 may have lost its purpose these days. Most fans will look at WrestleMania 18 as a curiosity, being the first WWE Gamecube game. Others will play WrestleMania 19 just for the revenge mode because of how ludicrous it is. Day of Reckoning 2 is the refined final game that pretty much perfected the WWE Gamecube series. So where does that leave Day of Reckoning 1? There's definitely a lot of people who prefer the first Day of Reckoning over the second, and they'd recommend the game out of nostalgia, but someone who has never played these games before might completely dismiss Day of Reckoning 1 and go straight for the sequel. Day of Reckoning 2 was released the year after Day of Reckoning 1, so this game really only had a small time frame as the latest and greatest WWE Gamecube game. Still, common praise is given to Day of Reckoning 1 thanks to its simplicity over Day of Reckoning 2 and also the faster loading times, but if I'm honest, personally, I'd still pick Day of Reckoning 2 before playing the first here. With this in mind though, if you want the full career mode experience, play the first game before playing the second. So I'll end this video by saying that Day of Reckoning on the GameCube is still very much recommended, and you shouldn't look over it due to the other WWE releases on the GameCube. The roster is pretty decent, entrances may look a little off, but they're still very acceptable. Some character models actually look fantastic, and the gameplay itself is where Day of Reckoning really shines. The story mode has been surpassed these days, but for the very first fully fledged story mode in a GameCube WWE game, it's still pretty good. Fans of Evolution in particular will enjoy this one, and the whole presentation of the game is on point, a giant leap forward in comparison to previous games. GameCube is also pretty easy to emulate these days on a reasonable PC, so if you have the means to play Day of Reckoning, I'd say give it a go. I think it's still more fun than 2K20, but that isn't saying much, I know. Next time though, we will look at Day of Reckoning 2, my favourite WWE game on Nintendo's GameCube, and then that will be every WWE GameCube game covered on the channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope you join me next time.